So it's a well-known fact that parents exist purely to shove photographs of their children down your throat, and I am no exception. The one on the right has featured in other talks I've done, mainly because she's old enough to interact with computers, and she understands some of the basic concepts. The one on the left has been spared the limelight somewhat, partly due to his age, but also because he's not had the best start in life. 24 hours after this photo was taken, he ended up in hospital and has been on medication ever since. Now, one symptom of Rupert's condition is bouts of pain, which can cause, well, they can be really quite severe at times. They're kidney-related. The only thing that seemed to bring him comfort was music. Initially, track 10 from this CD, which I was intensely happy about because it comes straight from my iPhone's favorites, but as he aged, his taste moved towards this. 52 minutes of upbeat nursery rhymes, starting with 4 different renditions of The Wheels on the Bus, which takes up over 8 minutes and 40 seconds. I know, I counted. The video has had over 60 million views on YouTube, and almost every single one of those is me. Now, if at any point during this talk you think Dom has finally lost it, I would ask you to hold judgment until you have been and seen the whole of this in one sitting from start to finish. And then you may change your assessment to one of how I'm still lucid. That said, you cannot have this level of immersion without it creeping into your subconscious, and it's there that it met up with my developer brain, which is probably the only reason why I haven't completely lost it, at least more than I previously had. Now, I already did The Wheels on the Bus at last year's ACCU Lightning Talks. If you missed it, I recommend you invent a time machine. And since I've had to strip what was a 45-minute talk down to a 15-minute talk, it's going by the wayside, and we're going to zip through the rest. So hold on tight. It's going to be fast. As I was going to St. Ives, I met a man with 7 wives. Each wife had 7 sacks. Each sack had 7 cats. Each cat had 7 kits. Kits, cats, sacks, and wives. How many were going to St. Ives? This is a classic riddle, and it is designed to trip you up. So as I was going to St. Ives, that's 1 person, I met a man with 7 wives, that's 1 and 7, so that's 8. Each wife had 7 sacks, and so on and so forth. Kits, cats, sacks, and wives. So we've made a mistake, actually. We don't want the man. We want to exclude him. That's better. Look, there's a pattern. This is now 7 to the 0, 7 to the 1, 7 to the 2. So back to the kits, cats, sacks, and wives, 2,800 in total. So how many were going to St. Ives? To answer this question, we need to turn to JavaScript. Undefined. So we know that there's at least 1 person going to St. Ives, but depending on how you read the riddle, you could argue it's 2,800, 2,801, 2,802, or if you're really pedantic, you can include the people who are also going to St. Ives that are not included in the text of the riddle that happened to be going on the day. The perfectionist in me wants it to be 2,801 because you have a lovely progression, but quite often the world does not look like this. Building complex systems requires clear, consistent, and unambiguous language, and a clear definition of exactly what it is that we're trying to achieve. Notice how the riddle plays on our innate desire to actually start solving the problem, a problem that doesn't actually exist, possibly. I've done loads of calculations before I even know what's been asked for, because I think I know what's been asked for. I've jumped ahead. I've made assumptions. So, heads, shoulders, knees, Antos. What the hell are knees, Antos? Now, I'm guessing because we're in the head-shoulder region, it's somewhere around here. You're talking about eyes and nose. So I'm thinking it's the glands that people check. Oh, you look a bit picky. Of course, now I'm just being silly. At least I wish I was. It's the turn of the millennium. Web services are a thing. We're exposing those to where I work, and it's decided that we need them. So a workshop set up. All the big wigs are invited. We all sit around a table. And I worked with a chap called Sal Mehdi, who was a fairly straightforward bloke, and sort of opened the meeting with a very simple question. Define web services. So we went around the room to find out what it was that people thought that web services were. And we didn't even get round to the table before the meeting was cancelled. So if I cannot unambiguously describe what it is that I'm supposed to code, how am I supposed to code it? Briefly looking like an idiot going, what is a Nisanto? Is much better than turning around and going, hey, look, I've produced the Nisanto code. That's just going to make me look like a complete moron a week down the line. This one isn't a nursery rhyme. It comes from Friends, Phoebe and Friends. Over the cow in the middle goes moo. It's a fairly innocuous statement, but let's pretend that we are not versed in cows or meadows. This line tells us absolutely nothing, and it opens up a whole bunch of questions. Is mooing a function of the cow or the meadow? Does placing other animals in the meadow cause them to moo? Does a cow only moo in the meadow? Will it moo elsewhere, and under what conditions? What circumstances will it cause it? And is it a time function? Is it constant mooing? Is there other things that may affect it? Simply assuming that everyone knows what you're talking about, and that everyone knows what's been said, and the client and the developer and everyone are talking the same language, is prone to going horribly wrong. And the misunderstandings that can happen are truly mind-blowing. Take, for example, the Mars Climate Orbiter. It's a not inexpensive bit of kit that was hurled 30-odd billion miles, only to disintegrate in the Martian atmosphere because of a misunderstanding and the incorrect use of units. What makes perfect sense to one group of people may be completely nonsensical to another group. But misunderstandings are nothing when it comes to assumption. Ring a roses, a pocket full of posies, a tissue, we all fall down. It's something that I would expect my daughter to sing in the playground at school. Of course, most of us know that this actually dates back to the time of the Black Death, and it's listing the symptoms that sufferers of the Black Death would have before they keeled over and died. Except it's not. That's a myth. It's like we all know that there are 60 seconds in a minute, except when there aren't. And that weekends always fall on a Saturday and a Sunday, except when you live somewhere where they don't. There's 1,000,001 other things that we think we know, but don't, or incorrectly assume, or just don't know in the first place, and they're out there to go trip us up, because we are, after all, human. And we might like to think that we know everything, but we don't. So Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow. So what have we got here? We've got we've got a color type. We've got a lamb in there. We've got a size. There's going to be a string. We're going to define snow as just being pure white. The size is little, putting it as a const in there. Notice we're not shouting about the const. So great. What else do we know about this lamb? Everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. So location, some kind of pathing algorithm is going to be required in there. Now, I have also worked on the Bar Black Sheep project, so in that we needed to know how much wool was required, and whether it had, so we just add those just in case. So there's a yield and types of bags. It's a flag for wool currently. I might go back and refactor this so that we work out if there is any wool based on numbers, checking yield greater than 0. The old McDonald project has taught us that sheep go bar, so we better add that in. It's a new sound attribute. It's all defaulted because all sheep go bar. And since we've made this generic, we can wrap it up as a full-on sheep microservice and open source it. This does actually work. But I would caution you at this point to stop. Even this was too much. Let's get rid of the descriptive fluff that doesn't do anything. Now it all fits in one column and a bigger size so you might actually be able to read. But it's still wrong. We need the lamb's location, Mary's location, and some kind of algorithm that places the lamb as close to Mary as possible. We later learn, if we go through the poem, that this pathing may be blocked by prohibited areas, so we can update the code, but it's still fairly succinct. We've got an area that you can't go into. Nothing else has been asked for, so why make life hard for yourself? We could write some super elegant lamb code, but it's never going to survive contact with the real world. The real world is hostile towards logic. Take a look at name. A name is made up of title, a given name, 0 or more middle names, and a surname, and 0 or more suffixes. To output the name, we just add this little piece of code, except in some cultures, surname comes first. So we need to handle that. And in fact, only the given name may be used, which we can handle here, so like Madonna and what have you. However, sometimes it's not even a Unicode character. Thank you, Prince. So unless otherwise absolutely necessary, I'd suggest you just use this for a name. It gets rid of a whole class of problem and means you can get something up and running very quickly. And if you need to change it later, you can do that. Now, incidentally, using this also helps us with the whole asking for gender and first name and surname stuff. Just put name. If I want to identify my gender in there, I can. I can put Mr. Davis if I really want to. So it's not just a logical thing that's happening here. And if you're making your software easy to change like this, if you're getting out quickly, if you're making it highly configurable and getting it to the client's hands as fast as possible, then we can start teasing out all these little gotchas that will trip us up and cause our spacecraft to evaporate in the Martian atmosphere. And then everyone's happy, and if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Which is a horrible segue, I apologize. But this one is interesting because it actually reads like code. With a little bit more refactoring, we could even make this generic, so we can just pass in an action, such as clap hands, stamp feet. But we're going to leave it like this, not least because this doesn't have a security flaw that the refactored version would. Turns out, I am not the only developer who is worrying about this stuff. And by limiting the code to clapping, we are avoiding this particular remote execution effect. If we made this internet-enabled, we would have to worry about flood attacks, though. Beyond security issues, what else does this tell me? It tells me the author does not have a blind clue about threading. As it stands, we're running single-threaded because we're in the main function, but we're doing 4 redundant checks. If you're happy and you know it, it's been checked 4 times. So this is functionally similar, but with a single check. But written like this, we're in a world of pain. This could result with hands being clapped 3 times, twice, once, not at all. And we can't even know which ones are going to work. The reason, of course, being multi-threading, we have no control over you. It could get changed between checks. It's perfectly possible for us to be happy and decide that we know it, and that we really, really want to show it, but for us not to clap our hands. Because we fail at the next check. Now, this kind of crappy, non-deterministic code is the stuff that we're teaching to our kids, albeit through the form of nursery rhymes. And we're doing this from a very, very early age. So it's little wonder that code like this is just everywhere. Of course, in the real world, the checks are normally separated by time and space. So it's not always obvious that what you're doing is in fact stupid. One of the classic examples here is the Knight Capital example, where they had a piece of code which they enabled with a flag. Then they stopped using the piece of code, and then they reused the flag to enable something else. Now, they're not totally stupid, so they did remove the old code that they'd stopped using on 7 servers. On one server, some 12 years after they made this change, they forgot to remove it. Now, it was a small, innocuous piece of code that just did some totaling and told a loop to stop. Unfortunately, that loop was the loop that was buying the trades. So when a trade came in, this application would happily split the trade into multiple subtrades and not stop, ever. But it's okay, because we can roll this stuff back. So they did. And now, rather than having dodgy code running on 1 server and 7 servers being okay, we now have dodgy code running on 8 servers and none of them being okay. So we're now doing this 8 times faster. So at one point, they were $665 billion exposed. I calculated it. They needed to run for another 10 seconds, so we could have got the lovely 666. Unfortunately not. And finally, they managed to work out that they needed to turn this stuff off. I think it's something like $175,000 a second for 45 minutes that was lost, which is pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. So, if my problem-solving developer mind went and found a bunch of problems to be solved in such an inane place as nursery rhymes, think how it's going to react in the workplace, where we have actual problems, many of which need to be solved. So before you dive into solving these problems, stop. Think. Talk to people. And make sure that you are solving the right problem. Be happy. Know it. And now it's time for you to clap your hands. Thank you very much. So I will open the floor to questions, but I suspect there will be none. There's often a stunned silence after this one.
Are there any questions?
Stunned silence it is. There are...
Question, really, which is how hard it is to take the risk of being the idiot that asks, what's this mean? But
Yes.
Everyone's secretly wondering that and assuming everyone else must know they're the idiot.
So the statement there was, it's the taking the risk to be the person who says, I don't understand. There's a classic XKCD, which we mention a lot at my place of work. And it states that there are things that everyone knows, but surely at some point in their life, they must have not known. And Randall's gone through and done the calculations and decided, I think just for the US, but every day there are 10,000 people who discover things that everyone knows for the first time. So rather than sitting down and going, huh, you don't know, moron. It's like, ooh, you are one of the 10,000. Today is your lucky day. You get to find out about this thing. And by changing that kind of mentality where we work, it's become a lot more acceptable to say, I don't understand, I don't get it. It's a little shift in mentality there.
Can you give a more detailed explanation of remote code execution on your top?
It's still an unpatched flaw, so we're not going to release too many details until we've had time to retrofit. Cool.
Do you have a solution to the how many men went to
No, again, well, you should know this. You use JavaScript. Just ask it. It'll tell you, undefined.
Any more for any more? I think I need to have the hammer.
Thank you very much.